The Rolex slipped from Helen's fingers and landed softly on the pawn shop counter. For a moment, neither she nor the man behind the counter said a word. Rainwater dripped from her coat onto the floor. Her eyes remained fixed on the watch, not because it was expensive, not because it carried a famous name, but because it was the last thing her father had ever placed in her hands. The pawn shop owner picked it up and examined it. "You sure about this?" he asked. Helen swallowed hard. No, she was not sure. She wasn't sure she would ever forgive herself for letting it go. She wasn't sure she would ever stop missing the man who had worn that watch every day of his life. She wasn't sure she was ready to lose the final piece of him she still had. But outside, less than a mile away, a stranger was fighting for his life. A terrible crash had left him trapped and badly injured. The storm had slowed everything. Every minute mattered, and Helen had run out of options. The pawn shop owner looked at her again. "Ma'am, once I buy it, that's it." Helen closed her eyes. The words hit harder than she expected. "Once I buy it, that's it." She remembered her father's smile. She remembered him checking the time before church. She remembered him laughing when she was little and asking why. Grown-ups loved watches so much. She remembered the day he placed the Rolex in her hands. "Take care of it," he had told her. Helen's fingers tightened. For a second she nearly grabbed the watch and walked out. But another image entered her mind. A man lying injured in the rain. A man whose name she didn't know. A man who might not survive if help didn't reach him quickly enough. Helen opened her eyes. "How much?" she asked quietly. The owner named a price. Helen nodded. The amount felt small compared to what she was giving away, but she wasn't selling a watch for money. She was trading a memory for a chance to save a life. As the owner began preparing the paperwork, Helen stared at the empty spot on her wrist. A piece of her heart felt missing already. What she didn't know was that the stranger she was trying to save was one of the wealthiest men in Ohio. What she didn't know was that weeks later, that same man would stand face to face with her. And when he finally found her, his first words would leave her speechless. "I didn't come because of the watch," he said. "I came because of the woman who gave it up." Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from today, and if you believe kindness still matters in this world, please take a second to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Love, Money, and Secret. Every like, every comment, and every subscription helps YouTube share these stories with more people. You won't want to miss what happens next. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together today. Bless every person watching this story. Give strength to those facing difficult seasons, comfort to those carrying heavy hearts, and hope to those waiting for better days. May kindness, love, and wisdom guide our steps. Let this story remind us that every good deed matters, even when no one is watching. Amen. Welcome to Love, Money, and Secret, where America's greatest stories and life lessons meet creativity and heart. If you're new to the family, we're grateful to have you here. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring more unforgettable stories your way. 3 weeks later, Helen almost dropped the grocery bag she was carrying. A black luxury SUV had stopped outside her apartment building. She barely noticed it at first. People with expensive cars didn't usually have business in her neighborhood. She adjusted the bag in her arms and continued toward the entrance. The driver's side door opened. A tall man stepped out. The moment Helen saw his face, she froze. She knew that face, not from television, not from social media, not from a newspaper. She knew it because she had spent one terrifying night trying to keep that man alive, the injured stranger, the man from the crash, the man whose life had cost her father's Rolex. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Michael looked almost as nervous as she felt. That surprised her. Rich people were supposed to be confident. Important people were supposed to have answers. But the man standing in front of her looked like someone who had rehearsed a speech 100 times and forgotten every word. Finally, he smiled. A small, uncertain smile. "Helen?" She tightened her grip on the grocery bag. "Yes?" Michael let out a breath, as if he had been searching for that answer for weeks. "I finally found you." Helen stared at him. Part of her expected a thank you. Part of her expected a handshake. Part of her expected a check. What she didn't expect was the emotion in his eyes. The man looked genuinely relieved, like finding her mattered more than she understood. "You found me?" she asked. Michael nodded. "It took longer than I expected." Helen laughed softly. "Well, congratulations, here I am." The joke landed, but neither of them moved. A strange silence settled between them. Helen broke it first. "Look, if you're here to pay me back for the watch, you don't have to." Michael blinked. "The watch?" "The Rolex." She shrugged. "I sold it, it's gone, you lived, that's what matters." Michael looked away briefly. The fact that she could say it so casually hit him harder than any business negotiation he had ever faced. For weeks, he had been thinking about that sacrifice, thinking about what he would have done if someone asked him to give. up the last thing connecting him to his father. The honest answer embarrassed him. He wasn't sure he could have done it. Yet Helen had, for a complete stranger, for a man she didn't even know. Helen shifted the grocery bag again. Listen, I appreciate you stopping by, really, but you don't owe me anything. Michael looked directly at her. No, his voice was calm. I do owe you something. Helen sighed. Here it comes. The money, the repayment, the wealthy man solving everything with a check. She had seen enough of life to know how these stories usually ended. Michael reached into his jacket. Helen immediately shook her head. Don't. He paused, confused. I wasn't taking out money. That caught her off guard. Michael slowly lowered his hand. Then he said the words that would stay with Helen long after the conversation ended. I didn't come because of the watch. Helen frowned. Michael continued. I came because of the woman who gave it up. The world seemed to go quiet. For the first time since the accident, Helen didn't know what to say. Michael smiled. Not the smile of a billionaire, not the smile of a CEO, just the smile of a man whose life had been changed by someone else's kindness. And at that moment, neither of them knew that this meeting was about to become the beginning of something much bigger than gratitude. It would become friendship, trust, healing, and eventually love. But before we get into that journey, let me ask you something. Have you ever helped someone without expecting anything in return? If your answer is yes, tell us about it in the comments below. Stories like yours inspire people more than you know. And if you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes good people exist. Now let's go back to where it all began. To a rainy evening in Ohio, to a caregiver named Helen, and to a Rolex watch that meant more than money ever could. Long before Michael knew her name, Helen was just trying to make it. Through another long day in Ohio without letting life steal her smile. She worked as a caregiver, moving from one elderly person's home to another with a small bag on her shoulder, a tired body, and a heart that somehow kept giving even when her pockets stayed almost empty. That morning she stood in a small kitchen, stirring oatmeal, while an elderly woman sat near the table watching her closely. You put sugar in that? The woman asked. Helen glanced over her shoulder. A little means you're hiding something. Helen smiled. At your age, you've earned the right to investigate breakfast. The woman laughed, and Helen laughed with her, though her feet were already aching. She had been awake since before sunrise. Her rent was behind. Her phone bill was waiting. Her fridge at home had more space than food, but when she stepped into someone's house to care for them, she never carried bitterness in with her. She helped with meals, medicine reminders, laundry, bathing, and sometimes just sitting beside someone who felt forgotten. By noon, Helen had already cleaned one apartment, helped another patient walk safely across a living room, and listened to the same story twice without making the person feel embarrassed. Your patient, one elderly man told her. Helen adjusted his blanket and said, No, sir, I'm just too tired to argue, he chuckled. That still counts. Helen had a way of making people feel human, not like a job, not like a burden, like they still mattered. But being kind did not pay enough. By late afternoon, she sat on a bus bench with her work bag pressed against her knees, checking her phone. One message reminded her about an overdue payment. Another showed her account balance. She stared at the numbers for a moment, breathed out slowly, and locked the screen. No need to scare myself twice, she muttered. As she adjusted her sleeve, the Rolex on her wrist caught the light. Helen's expression softened. The watch looked too elegant for her worn coat and tired hands, but she never wore it to show off. She wore it because it had belonged to her father. He had not left her a house. He had not left her money. He had left her that watch and the kind of wisdom that stayed alive even after a person was gone. Whenever life pressed too hard, Helen touched the Rolex and remembered his voice telling her, Don't let hard times make you hard. That sentence had carried her through unpaid bills, lonely nights, rude clients, and days when she wondered why good people seemed to struggle the most. A coworker had once told her, Helen, sell that thing. You could use the money. Helen had smiled and answered, Some things feed your stomach, some things feed your strength. Still, she knew the truth. The watch could probably solve a few urgent problems, but selling it felt impossible. It was her last connection to the man who had taught her how to stand straight when life tried to bend her. That evening, as clouds gathered over Ohio and the air turned heavy with rain, Helen finished her final shift and stepped toward the bus stop. She was tired, hungry, worried, but she still helped an older man lift his grocery bag onto the bus before taking her seat near the window. The Rolex rested quietly on her wrist. Helen had no idea that before the night was over, she would be forced to choose between keeping the last gift from her father and saving the life of a stranger she had never met. By the time Helen's bus pulled away from the stop, the rain had started falling harder. It tapped against the windows while tired passengers sat in silence, each person carrying their own private worries. Helen leaned her head lightly against the glass and watched the Ohio streets blur under the evening rain. Her body wanted rest. Her mind wanted peace. But her heart kept counting bills, rent, groceries, medication for one of her elderly clients that she had promised to help pick up the next morning. Helen rubbed her forehead and whispered, "Lord, I'm not asking to be rich. I'm just asking not to panic every time my phone rings." A man seated 2 rows ahead turned slightly, as if he had heard her. Helen gave him a small smile. "Just praying with attitude," she said. He chuckled and faced forward again. The bus continued down a quiet road outside the busier part of town. Traffic had thinned. The rain made the road shine, and every passing headlight stretched across the wet pavement. Helen adjusted her coat around her shoulders and glanced at the Rolex. The watch still looked steady, calm, and dependable, just like her father had been. She touched it once, then looked away. A few minutes later, the bus slowed sharply. Helen lifted her head. The driver leaned forward, staring through the windshield. "What's going on?" someone asked from the back. The bus rolled a little farther before stopping near the side of the road. Helen looked past the front window. At first, she saw only rain and darkness. Then lightning flashed briefly across the sky, and she saw it. A car had gone off the road. It sat crooked in a ditch, its front end damaged, one side pressed near a muddy slope. The headlights were still on, shining weakly through the rain. For 1 second, everyone on the bus froze. Then voices rose. "Somebody call 911. Is anyone inside? Don't go out there, it's dangerous." Helen was already standing. The bus driver opened the door and shouted, "Ma'am, wait!" Helen grabbed her bag and stepped down into the rain. The cold hit her immediately, soaking through her shoes and coat, but she kept moving. Behind her, a few passengers called out, but no one followed at first. Helen hurried toward the ditch, slipping once before catching herself on a wet patch of grass. "Hello?" she shouted. "Can you hear me?" The driver's side window was cracked. Inside, a man was slumped, partly against the seatbelt, breathing hard. Helen's stomach tightened. He was alive. Barely alert, but alive. She leaned closer, careful not to touch anything she didn't understand. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man groaned faintly. Helen wiped rain from her face. "My name is Helen. I'm here with you, okay? Help is coming." His eyes opened halfway. He looked confused, hurt, and frightened in a way that made him seem less like a stranger and more like somebody's family. "Don't move," Helen said quickly. "Just breathe. Stay with me." He tried to speak, but only a broken sound came out. Helen turned back toward the road. "Call 911, she shouted. "Tell them there's a man injured in the ditch." The bus driver was already on the phone. Another passenger stepped down and stood near the road, waving at approaching cars to slow them. Helen stayed beside the vehicle. Rain ran down her face, but she ignored it. The man's breathing was uneven. She could see blood near his forehead, and his hand shook against the seat. Helen reached through the cracked window as far as she safely could and placed 2 fingers near his wrist. His pulse was there, but weak enough to scare her. "Listen to me," she said, keeping her voice firm. "You are not allowed to leave this world tonight. I already had a long day, and I refuse to add that to my schedule." The man's eyes shifted toward her. For a brief moment, something almost like a smile touched his face. Helen forced one back. "That's right," she whispered. "Stay stubborn." The bus driver called out from the road. "They said the weather's slowing them down. There's flooding on the main route." Helen's chest tightened. "How long?" "I don't know." Helen looked back at the injured man. His eyes were closing again. "No, sir," she said sharply. "Open your eyes." He didn't respond. Helen's voice trembled, but she kept control. "Open your eyes for me." His eyelids moved. She exhaled. "That's better." Another car pulled over near the bus, but the driver only looked from a distance, unsure what to do. Helen waved him closer. "We need more help." The man hesitated. Helen pointed toward the damaged car. "He is hurt. Standing there. Looking scared is not a medical plan." That got him moving. He came closer, and together they checked the area around the vehicle while waiting for instructions from emergency services. No one tried to pull Michael out carelessly. Helen knew enough from caregiving to understand that one wrong move could make things worse. Still, doing nothing felt unbearable. The injured man whispered something. Helen leaned closer. "What did you say?" His lips moved again. She caught only one word. "Cold." Helen pulled off her coat and pushed it through the broken window, covering as much of him as she could. The other passenger said, "Ma'am, you'll freeze." Helen didn't look away from the man. "He's doing worse than I am." Minutes passed. Each one felt too long. The bus driver came closer again. phone still in hand. His expression had changed. "They're trying, but it may take longer. Dispatch said another route is blocked." Helen stared at him. "How much longer?" He shook his head. "They didn't say." Helen looked toward the road, then back at the man in the car. A stranger. A man with no name. A man whose life was balancing on time they did not have. Her hand moved unconsciously to her wrist. The Rolex was wet under the rain. Helen looked down at it. For the first time, the thought came fully. There was a pawn shop not far from the next intersection. She knew because she passed it often. If money could get someone with the right vehicle, the right equipment, or faster private assistance moving toward them, then she had one thing worth selling. Her father's watch. Helen closed her eyes for 1 second. "Daddy," she whispered, "please understand." Then she opened them and turned to the bus driver. "Keep talking to dispatch. Keep him awake. I'm going to get help." The driver frowned. "Where are you going?" Helen stepped back from the ditch, rain pouring over her face. "To do the only thing I can—" She looked once more at the injured man. "Stay alive," she told him. "I'm coming back." Then Helen ran into the rain, toward the nearest road, toward the pawn shop, and toward the hardest choice she had ever made. Helen ran like the rain itself was chasing her. Her shoes slapped against the wet sidewalk, water splashing up her legs. With every step, her lungs burned. Her coat was gone, left behind too. Cover the injured stranger in the damaged car. Her work uniform clung to her skin, and her bag bounced against her side as she pushed forward, toward the small pawn shop near the next intersection. Behind her, the bus lights glowed faintly through the storm. Behind her, a man was fighting to stay alive. Ahead of her was the only option she could think of. The Rolex on her wrist felt heavier than it had ever felt before. Helen slowed when she reached the pawn shop door. For a second, she stood under the narrow awning, breathing hard, rain dripping from her hair and chin. The sign said open. Her hand moved to the watch. "No," she whispered to herself. Her fingers curled around it. This was the watch her father had worn on Sundays. The watch he had, tapped whenever Helen was late as a girl. The watch he had handed to her when life had already started taking too much from both of them. She looked back toward the road. A flash of headlights passed through the rain. The stranger's face returned to her mind, his eyes opening and closing, his weak voice saying he was cold, his breath sounding uneven. Helen pushed the door open. A small bell rang above her. The man behind the counter looked up from a glass case. He stared at her soaked clothes first, then at her face. "Ma'am, you all right?" Helen stepped forward quickly. "I need to sell this." She unclasped the Rolex before she could lose courage. The moment it left her wrist, her stomach tightened. She placed it on the counter. The man looked down. His expression changed. He picked it up carefully, turning it under the light. "This is real?" Helen's voice came out sharper than she expected. "Yes, it's real." He glanced at her again. "You have papers?" "No." "Box?" "No." "Receipt?" Helen pressed her wet hands together. "No. I don't have time for all that." The man studied her. Helen leaned closer. "There's been a crash down the road. A man is hurt badly. Emergency help is delayed because of the storm. I need cash now." The man blinked. "Cash for what?" "For help. Transportation. Anything faster than waiting while he gets worse." He looked at the watch again. "Ma'am, I don't control ambulances." "I know that," Helen said, struggling to stay calm. "But money opens. Doors faster than empty hands. Somebody nearby has a tow truck, a medical transport van, a private emergency contact, something. I don't have time to stand outside begging people to care." The man did not answer immediately. Helen saw doubt in his face. She understood how she looked. A soaked caregiver, standing in a pawn shop at night, trying to sell a Rolex without papers. If the situation had been different, she might have laughed at how bad it looked. But nothing about that moment felt funny. The man set the watch down. "I can give you far less without documents." Helen's mouth went dry. "How much?" He named the amount. Helen stared at him. "That watch is worth more than that." "I know." "Then why are you saying that number?" "Because that's what I can offer right now." Helen looked at the Rolex. The price felt disrespectful. Not just to the watch, to her father, to every memory attached to it. She almost snatched it back. Her hand moved halfway across the counter. The man noticed. "You sure you want to do this?" Helen did not answer. Rain beat against the front window. A car horn sounded outside. Somewhere down the road, the stranger was still trapped in that ditch. Helen imagined returning with nothing. She imagined the bus driver shaking his head. She imagined the man's eyes closing and not opening again. Her hand stopped. She pulled it back. "How fast can you give me the money?" The man looked at her for a long second. Then he opened a drawer and brought out a form. "I need your signature." Helen picked up the pen. Her hand shook. Not from cold this time, from pain. The letters of her name looked strange as she wrote them. Like someone else was signing away something that belonged to her heart. The man counted the cash. Helen grabbed it before he could finish sliding it across the counter. "Wait," he said. "You need your copy. I don't need paper. I need time." She turned toward the door. The man called after her. "Ma'am." Helen stopped. He held out the copy of the receipt. "You may want this later." Helen hesitated, then took it and shoved it into her bag. Outside, the rain hit her again. She looked once at her bare wrist. The skin underneath was lighter where the watch had always rested. For a second she felt empty. Then she forced herself to move. Not toward home, not toward safety. Back toward the road, back toward the ditch, back toward the stranger who still had a chance if she moved fast enough. Helen lifted her head and ran. This time she was not carrying her father's Rolex. She was carrying the price of a stranger's life. Helen reached the accident scene with her chest burning and her legs trembling. The bus was still parked near the side of the road. A few passengers stood under the rain, waving their phones, trying to guide traffic away from the ditch. The driver turned when he saw Helen running back. "You came back," he said. Helen bent forward for 1 second, catching her breath. "I said I would." She pulled the cash from her bag, keeping the receipt tucked inside. "Who can get here faster?" she asked. "Anybody nearby with medical? Transport, a truck, a private service, anything?" The driver pointed toward a man standing near a vehicle with hazard lights flashing. He said he knows someone with equipment close by, but they wanted payment up front. Helen walked straight to him. "How much?" The man named the price. Helen did not argue. She counted the money into his hand and said, "Call them now." He looked surprised. "You sure?" Helen pointed toward the ditch. "Does he look like we have time for a meeting?" That was enough. The man made the call. Helen hurried back down the muddy slope. Michael's eyes were half open, but his breathing still sounded rough. Her coat remained over him, soaked but useful enough to keep some warmth around his body. Helen leaned near the broken window. "Hey," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "I'm back. Don't make me regret running in these shoes." Michael's eyes moved slightly. He didn't know her name. He didn't know what she had just sold. He didn't know she had given away the last thing her father left her so a stranger could have a better chance. "Here, you let them help you. No arguing. You look like the type that." And Helen did not tell him. She only stayed close. "You're going to hear people coming soon," she said. "When they get argues with doctors." A faint sound came from him. Helen smiled through the rain. "I knew it." Within minutes, lights appeared down the road. Help had finally arrived, not from the delayed route, but from the faster contact paid for with the money Helen had brought back. The scene became active at once. Voices called out. Equipment moved. Careful hands took control. Helen stepped back when they asked for space. She watched as Michael was stabilized. Every second still felt serious, but now there was movement. Now there was a chance. The bus driver came beside her. "You did good," he said quietly. Helen shook her head. "He's not safe yet, but he's closer than he was." She looked down at her bare wrist. For a moment, the emptiness hurt so sharply she had to close her hand around it. The driver noticed but said nothing. When Michael was finally moved from the damaged car, Helen stood near the edge of the road, arms folded tight against the cold. One of the responders asked if she was family. Helen shook her head. "No. I just saw the crash. Do you know his name?" "No. Do you want to ride along?" Helen looked at Michael. His face was pale. His eyes were closed now, but he was breathing. He was surrounded by people who knew what to do. Her part was finished. "No," she said softly. "He has help now." The responder nodded and turned away. Helen stood there until the vehicle carrying Michael pulled away into the rain. Only then did she allow herself to feel the cold. It ran through her sleeves, her shoes, her bones. The bus driver called from behind her. "Ma'am, we can still take you." "Home." Helen looked at the bus, then at the road where Michael had disappeared. Then at her wrist. She gave a tired smile. "I hope your bus has heat." The driver opened the door wider. "Tonight, I'll pretend it does." Helen climbed back on. A few passengers looked at her differently now. Not with pity, not with judgment, with quiet respect. Helen took her seat near the window. No one asked what she had done. No one asked why her wrist was bare. That was fine with her. She did not help the stranger to become a story. She did not sell the Rolex to be praised. She did it because life had placed a choice in front of her, and her father had raised her to choose mercy when mercy had a chance to matter. As the bus moved again, Helen leaned back and closed her eyes. Her heart ached. Her body shivered. Her bank problems had not disappeared. Her father's watch was gone, but somewhere ahead a man she did not know was still alive. That had to be enough. By the time Helen reached her apartment, the rain had softened. She stepped inside quietly, removed her wet shoes, and placed her bag on the table. The pawn shop receipt slipped out. Helen picked it up and stared at it. For a second, tears filled her eyes. She folded the receipt carefully and placed it in a drawer. Then she whispered, "I hope you understand, Daddy." The room gave no answer, only silence. Helen wiped her face, changed out of her wet clothes, and sat on the edge of her bed. She had no idea that the stranger she saved would wake up weeks later, asking about the woman in the rain. She had no idea that he would search for her. She had no idea that the watch she thought was gone forever would one day return to her hands. That night, Helen simply lay down, tired and cold, believing she had done one good thing and lost one precious thing. And because she did not expect a reward, she never left her name. Michael woke to the steady sound of medical machines and the heavy feeling of a body that had been through more than his mind could understand. At first, he did not know where he was. The ceiling above him was white. His mouth felt dry. His head throbbed with a dull pain that made even blinking feel like effort. He tried to lift his hand, but weakness pulled it back down. For a few seconds, panic rose in his chest. Then memories came in broken pieces. Rain, headlights, a sharp turn, the sound of metal hitting mud, cold air pressing against his face. Then a woman's voice, firm, warm, almost stubborn. "You are not allowed to leave this world tonight." Michael closed his eyes again. That voice stayed with him. It was clearer than the crash itself. He could not remember every detail of the accident. He could not remember how long he had been trapped. He could not remember who had first called for help. But he remembered her, not her face clearly, not her name, just her presence. She had stayed close when everything around him felt far away. He remembered trying to speak and failing. He remembered feeling cold. He remembered something being placed over him. A coat, maybe. Something soaked but warmer than the rain. He remembered her talking to him as if they knew each other, as if his life mattered to her, as if she had decided, without asking his permission, that he was going to survive. Michael opened his eyes again and turned his head slightly. His body protested. A sharp ache moved across his side, and he breathed through it. He had survived. That fact should have been enough to fill him with relief. But instead, one question sat heavily in his mind. Who was she? Later that morning, when he was strong enough to speak for more than a few seconds, he asked the first person who came near him, "The woman." The person beside him leaned closer. "What woman?" Michael swallowed. "At the crash. There was a woman. You need to rest. I need to know if she's okay. She wasn't injured from what we were told." Michael let that sink in. Not injured. Good. But it was not enough. "What's her name?" "I don't know. I'm sure someone can check the report later." Michael turned his face toward the window. Later. That word bothered him. He had built his life on solving problems quickly. In business, when something mattered, people moved, phones were answered, doors opened, files appeared. But this was different. This woman had not been an employee. She had not been paid. She had not been sent by his company. She had simply appeared in the rain and refused to leave him. For the next few days, Michael's recovery moved slowly. He had bruises, pain, and moments when exhaustion pulled him under without warning. He slept more than he wanted to. When he woke, the same memory returned. Her voice, her hand near his wrist, checking if he was still there, her words cutting through the fear. "Stay stubborn." That one almost made him smile. The strange thing was that Michael had heard thousands of compliments in his life. People praised his company. They praised his decisions. They praised his money, his influence, his discipline. But none of those voices followed him into sleep. Hers did. A woman he barely knew had spoken to him with more honesty than people who had sat across from him in expensive rooms for years. One afternoon, while sitting upright for the first time, Michael stared at the rain tapping softly against the hospital window. It was lighter than the storm from that night, but it brought everything back. He remembered how helpless he had felt. That was not a feeling Michael knew well. He was used to control, schedules, drivers, meetings, decisions, people waiting for his approval. But in that ditch, none of that had mattered. His wealth had not lifted the car. His title had not stopped the bleeding. His name had not cleared the flooded road. A stranger's kindness had reached him before anything else did. That humbled him more than the accident. He looked down at his hands. For years, Michael had believed he understood value. He knew the price of buildings, deals, land, contracts, and companies. He could judge numbers quickly. He could sense when people wanted something from him. But this woman had given him something he could not calculate. She had given him time. She had given him courage. She had given him a reason to hold on. A few days later, when his strength improved, he asked again, "The woman from the accident. Has anyone found her?" The answer was still no. Michael's jaw tightened. She didn't leave a name? No. Phone number? No. Address? No. That bothered him even more. People usually wanted to be known when they did something good for. Someone wealthy, they wanted access, recognition, a favor, a door opened, but she had left nothing, not even a name. Michael leaned back against the pillow, thinking. Maybe she did not know who he was. Maybe she had not cared. The thought unsettled him in a way he did not expect. For the first time in a long time, someone had seen him only as a human being. Not a CEO, not a bank account, not a headline, just a man injured in the rain. And she had stayed. By the end of the second week, Michael could walk slowly with support. His recovery was not finished, but his mind had become sharper. Every day, the same question grew louder. Who was the woman who saved him? On the day he was finally allowed to leave the hospital, Michael paused. Near the entrance. Outside, Ohio moved on as if nothing had happened. Cars passed, people hurried, rain clouds sat low in the sky. He should have been thinking about work. He should have been thinking about his company. Instead, he stood there thinking about a woman whose name he did not know, a woman with tired eyes, a woman with a strong voice, a woman who had made him laugh while he was barely conscious. Michael breathed in slowly. "I'm going to find her," he said. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. He did not know where the search would lead. He did not know what he would discover. He only knew one thing. Some people save your life and disappear. But Michael was not going to let Helen remain a stranger forever. The morning after leaving the hospital, Michael sat alone in his office. The room was large. The view was impressive. The company was still running. Everything looked exactly the same as it had before the accident. Yet something felt different. For the first time in years, Michael found himself staring at paperwork, without reading it. His thoughts kept returning to the woman from the rain, the woman who had refused to leave him. The woman who had spoken to him like his life mattered. He still did not know her name. He still did not know where she lived. He still did not know why a complete stranger had cared so much. But he intended to find out. Over the next several days, Michael began retracing everything connected to the accident. He started with the location. Then he spoke with people who had been present that night. The bus driver remembered seeing Helen. A few passengers remembered her running through the rain. Everyone seemed to describe the same thing. A hard-working woman, a determined woman, a woman who acted without hesitation, but nobody knew much more. The deeper Michael looked, the more unusual the story became. One afternoon, while reviewing details connected to that night, he discovered something that stopped him cold. The injured man had not simply waited for help. Someone had paid money to get faster assistance moving toward the accident scene when weather delays threatened valuable time. Michael sat forward. That fact immediately caught his attention. Who paid, and why? The answer led him to the small pawn shop. Michael drove there personally. The building looked ordinary. Nothing about it suggested it held answers to questions that had occupied his mind for weeks. Inside, he spoke calmly and respectfully. At first, the owner remembered little. Then Michael mentioned the rainy night. The expression on the man's face changed. Slowly, pieces returned. The soaked woman, the emergency, the watch, the rush. Michael frowned. What watch? The owner hesitated. Then he explained. A woman had entered during the storm carrying a Rolex. She had needed immediate money. She claimed a badly injured stranger needed help. Michael listened quietly. His chest tightened. The owner continued. The watch had clearly meant something to her. That part he remembered well. People sold valuables every day. But that woman had looked different. She had looked heartbroken, as though she was giving away something much bigger than a watch. Michael's hands slowly tightened. What happened to it? The owner looked uncomfortable. She sold it. Michael stared at him. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The room suddenly felt very quiet. The woman had sold a Rolex to help him, a complete stranger. Michael looked away briefly. He had expected kindness. He had expected courage. He had not expected sacrifice. Not this kind. Not the kind that hurts. Not the kind that costs something deeply personal. His voice lowered. Did she tell you why the watch mattered? The owner nodded. It belonged to her father. Michael froze. For a moment the words barely registered. Then they landed all at once. Her father. The watch had belonged to her father. Not an extra piece of jewelry. Not an investment. Not something sitting forgotten in a drawer. It was family. Memory. Love. Michael remembered waking in the hospital. Remembering her voice. remembering her refusal to leave. Now the picture became even clearer. The woman had not simply helped, she had paid a personal price to help, a price he never knew existed. Michael looked down at the counter. For years, people had given him things because of his wealth, attention, access, agreements, favors. Many wanted something back. This woman wanted nothing. She had disappeared without even leaving her name. The realization hit him harder than any business loss he had ever experienced. The owner opened a drawer. "I may still have something." Michael looked up. The man searched through several papers. Finally, he pulled out a copy of an old transaction record. Michael's pulse quickened. It wasn't much, just a small piece of information connected to the sale, but it was the first real clue, the first step toward finding her. As Michael left the shop, he sat in his vehicle for several minutes, without starting the engine. Rain tapped lightly against the windshield. Not a storm. Just enough to remind him of that night. His eyes moved toward his hands resting on the steering wheel. He imagined Helen standing in that pawn shop, soaked from the rain, terrified for someone she did not know, holding the last gift from her father, making a choice that most people would never make. Michael shook his head slowly. "Why would you do that?" he whispered. But deep down he already knew the answer, because she was the kind of person who saw someone in need and acted, the kind of person who measured life differently, the kind of person he had not met in a very long time. Over the following days, Michael continued searching, piece by piece, patiently, carefully. Eventually, the information led him to a caregiving agency. That surprised him. A caregiver. Suddenly, many things made sense. The calm voice, the compassion, the confidence during the emergency, the ability to focus while everyone else panicked. Michael learned enough to confirm one thing. Her name was Helen, the same woman he had been trying to find for weeks, the same woman who believed she would never see him again. Michael sat quietly after receiving the confirmation. A strange smile appeared on his face. Not because the search was over, because it was finally beginning. Now she had a name. Now she was real. Not just a memory from a storm. Not just a voice in the darkness. Helen, the woman who had changed the direction of his life without even trying. Michael looked out the window. For the first time since the accident, he felt certain about something. He wasn't searching for Helen because he owed her money. Money could never measure what she had done. He wasn't searching because he felt guilty, and he wasn't searching because he needed to close a chapter. He was searching because he genuinely wanted to know her, to understand her, to thank her properly, to meet the woman whose kindness had reached him at his weakest moment. Michael stood up from his desk. His recovery was still ongoing. His company still demanded attention. Important meetings still filled his calendar, but none of that felt as important as the next step, finding Helen. And when he finally stood in front of her, he had no intention of showing up with a simple check and a handshake, because after everything he had learned, Michael knew one thing for certain. The woman who sold her father's Rolex deserved far more than a transaction. She deserved to be seen. 3 weeks after the accident, Helen was walking home with a grocery bag pressed against her hip when the black SUV stopped outside her apartment building. She noticed it, but she did not stop. Expensive vehicles came through the area once in a while, usually lost, usually looking for the quickest way back to somewhere cleaner and quieter. Helen adjusted the grocery bag and kept walking. Then the driver's door opened. "Helen?" She stopped. The voice was familiar, but not enough for comfort. She turned slowly. Michael stood beside the SUV looking healthier than the last time she had seen him, though there was still a careful stiffness in the way he moved. His face was no longer pale from pain. His clothes were neat. His shoes looked like they had never known mud a day in their life. Helen stared at him. For a second, the rainy road returned to her mind. The damaged car, the broken window, the weak voice, the cold hand. "You?" she said softly. Michael nodded. "Me?" Helen looked him over, searching his face. "You're alive." A small smile touched his mouth. "Because of you." She looked away quickly. "Because help came. Because you made sure it came." Helen tightened her grip on the grocery bag. She did not like how directly he said it. Not because it was untrue, but because truth could feel heavy when spoken by someone who owed you something. "How did you find me?" she asked. Michael heard the caution in her voice and respected it. "I followed the details from that night. The bus. The people who were. There. The pawn shop." At the mention of the pawn shop, Helen's expression changed. Her eyes sharpened. "So you know," Michael nodded slowly, "I know about the Rolex." Helen breathed out through her nose, almost laughing, but not from joy. "Well, that saves us a long conversation. I didn't come to embarrass you." "You didn't embarrass me?" "No." "No." She lifted her chin. "I made a choice. I can stand by it. Michael admired that. Most people he knew explained themselves too much, especially around money. Helen did not. She stood in front of him with a grocery bag in. Her arms, tired from work, still carrying herself like dignity, was something no hardship could take. "I believe you," he said. Helen shifted slightly. "So what now?" Michael paused. "I wanted to thank you. You just did, properly." Helen gave him a look. Properly usually means money when people, like you say it. Michael did not pretend not to understand. "You're right, it often does." That answer caught her off guard. She expected defense, excuses, maybe a speech about how he was not like other wealthy men. Instead, he simply accepted the truth. Helen studied him more carefully. Michael continued, "I can repay what you lost." "No," the word came out fast. Michael stopped. Helen looked down at the grocery bag, then back at him. "I don't mean to be rude, but no, I haven't even offered an amount. That's the problem." Michael's face softened. "Tell me," Helen swallowed, "if I take money from you, then suddenly what I did becomes a transaction. I didn't sell that watch so one day a rich man could show up and balance the books." Michael was quiet. Helen went on, her voice calmer now. "I did it because you were hurt. That's all. You don't owe me a performance. You don't owe me a check. You don't owe me some big speech about how touched you are." Michael looked at her with honest respect. "You're right." Helen blinked. Again, he had surprised her. He took one careful step back, giving her more space. "I won't force repayment on you." "Good, but I hope you'll let me say this." His voice lowered. "That night changed me." Helen's eyes stayed on him. Michael seemed to choose his words carefully, not like a CEO giving an address, but like a man trying not to ruin the most important sentence of his day. "I spent most of my life thinking I understood value. I knew what things cost. I knew what people wanted. I knew how to measure profit, loss, risk, and return." Helen raised one eyebrow. "That sounds exhausting." He gave a small laugh. "It is," she almost smiled. Michael continued, "But you gave up something precious for a stranger who could not even tell you his name. You didn't know who I was. You didn't wait for thanks. You just acted." Helen looked away. Praise made her uncomfortable, especially from a man whose world looked nothing like hers. "I'm not special," she said. "I just didn't want you dying in a ditch." "That sounds special to me." Helen glanced at him again, and this time her face softened slightly. For a moment there was no SUV, no accident, no debt, no watch. Just two people standing outside an Ohio apartment building, trying to understand why life had brought them back to each other. Michael reached into his jacket slowly. Helen's shoulders stiffened. He noticed immediately and stopped. "It's not money," he said. She said nothing. He removed a simple folded paper and held it out. "My phone number. You can throw it away if you want." Helen did not take it at first. Michael kept his arm extended, but not forcefully. "I would like to know you," he said. "Not because of the Rolex. Not because I feel guilty. Not because I want to fix your life." Helen's voice was quiet. "Then why?" Michael looked directly at her. "Because when I was helpless, you saw me as a person. I'd like the chance to do the same for you." That answer reached somewhere Helen had not expected. She had spent years being seen as useful, a caregiver, a worker, a person people called when they needed something cleaned, cooked, lifted, arranged, or remembered. Very few people asked to know her. Not her service, not her sacrifice, her. Still, caution remained. "You know I don't need saving, right?" Michael nodded. "I know. And I don't need a rich man coming around making my life look like a charity project." "I know that too." Helen narrowed her eyes slightly. "You answer very calmly for someone standing on thin ice." Michael smiled. "I'm trying not to fall through." That finally made Helen laugh. Not loudly, not fully, but enough to ease the air between them. She shifted the grocery bag and reached for the folded paper. Their fingers almost touched. Both noticed. Neither mentioned it. Helen took the paper and tucked it into her bag. "I'm not promising anything," she said. "I'm not asking for a promise." "Good. Maybe coffee," Michael said. "Somewhere simple." "Your choice." Helen looked him over again, from his careful posture to the expensive SUV behind him. "My choice?" "Yes. That might be dangerous for you." "I'll take the risk." Helen smiled faintly. "There's a small coffee place near the bus line. Nothing fancy, no tiny cups with foam art." Michael nodded. "That sounds perfect." "You say that now." "I mean it." Helen turned toward the apartment entrance, then paused. "You really came all this way just to ask for coffee?" Michael's answer came without hesitation. "No. I came to thank the woman who saved my life. Coffee is me, hoping she lets me stay in the conversation a little longer." Helen stood still for a moment. The line could have sounded polished from someone else. From Michael, it sounded honest. She nodded once. "1 coffee," she said. Michael smiled. "1 coffee." Helen walked toward the building, but before going inside, she turned back. "And Michael?" Hearing his name in her voice made him straighten slightly. "Yes? If you show up with a check, I'm leaving." He raised one hand. "No check and no speech. I'll do my best." She pointed at him. "Rich people love speeches." Michael laughed softly. "I'll keep mine under control." Helen shook her head, but she was smiling when she entered the building. Michael stood outside for a few seconds after the door closed. He had expected gratitude to be simple. Find her, thank her, repay her, move on. Instead, Helen had drawn a line with more dignity than most people showed in boardrooms. And strangely, that line did not push him away. It made him want to understand her even more. For Helen, the moment was just as unsettling. Inside her apartment, she placed the grocery bag on the table and pulled the folded paper from her bag. Michael's number was written clearly. She stared at it for a long time. Part of her wanted to throw it away. Another part remembered his face when he said he wanted to know her. Not help her. Not own the story. Know her. Helen sighed and placed the paper near the drawer where she kept the pawn shop receipt. The watch was still gone. Her life was still hard. But something had shifted. The stranger from the rain had found her. And for the first time, Helen wondered if the loss of the Rolex had opened a door she never expected. Helen chose the coffee place on purpose. It sat near the bus line, between a laundromat and a small grocery store, with simple tables, plain mugs, and a menu that did not require translation. When Michael arrived, he looked around as if he was trying to understand the rules of a world no one had explained to him. Helen was already seated near the window. She watched him step inside, then raised one eyebrow. "You made it," Michael smiled. "I told you I would. You also said you wanted simple coffee. Let's see if your body accepts it." He sat across from her. "I'm ready." Helen pointed toward the counter. "Order regular coffee, not something. That sounds like a dessert wearing a business suit." Michael laughed. "Regular coffee." "Understood." When he returned with 2 mugs, Helen looked impressed. "Look at you. Surviving. I'm learning. That's good. Rich people need survival training." Michael sat down carefully. "Is this lesson 1? "No. Lesson 1 was don't show up with a check. I passed that one. Barely. Their first coffee lasted longer than either expected." Michael asked about her work, but not in a way that made her feel studied. Helen told him about long shifts, stubborn elderly clients, and how caregiving required patience, strength, and the ability to smile while being told the same story 3 times. Michael listened. Really listened. He did not interrupt with advice. He did not turn her struggles into a business lesson. When Helen noticed that, she softened a little. "You're quieter than I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "A CEO speech. Big words. Maybe some sentence about leadership." Michael shook his head. "I'm trying to stay out of trouble. That's wise." He smiled. "Also, I like hearing you talk." Helen looked down at her mug. That was the first time his words felt less like gratitude and more like something warmer. She changed the subject before her face could betray her. Over the next few weeks, coffee became a habit. Not every day, not in a way that crowded her life. Michael respected her schedule, and Helen respected his recovery. Some days he looked tired, but pretended he was fine. Helen always noticed. "You're doing that thing," she said one afternoon. "What thing?" "Acting like pain is a personal assistant you can fire." Michael leaned back with a small laugh. "That obvious? To a caregiver?" "Very." He nodded. "I'm healing." "Then let healing do its job." Michael looked at her with quiet admiration. "You talk to everybody. Like this? Only people who need sense?" "I should be honored. You should be careful." Their friendship slowly stretched beyond coffee. One Saturday, Helen invited Michael to a small church gathering after. He admitted he usually spent weekends working. "You don't have one free Saturday?" she asked. "I have free time. When?" Michael paused. Helen folded her arms. "Exactly." So he came. He arrived in clothes that were too formal for the gathering, and Helen nearly laughed when she saw him. "You look like you're about to buy the church building." Michael glanced down at himself. "Too much?" "Just a little." "Relax your shoulders before somebody asks you for a donation." He laughed, but he listened. That day, Michael saw a side of life money had never shown him. People greeted Helen with warmth. They teased her, asked how work was, and made sure she ate before leaving. Nobody cared about Michael's title. Most did not even know it. For once he was not the most important man in the room, and strangely he liked it. Helen watched him quietly from across the room. He was awkward at first, careful with his words, but he was respectful. He helped carry chairs without making a show of it. When someone handed him a plate, he accepted it with genuine thanks. When Helen caught him trying to fold a tablecloth the wrong way, she stepped in. No, that's not folding. That's fabric suffering. Michael held it up. I thought I was helping. You were participating. Helping is next level. He grinned. Teach me. She did. That small moment stayed with both of them longer than it should have. Later, Helen brought him to a neighborhood cookout. Michael had expected food. He had not expected laughter loud enough to make him forget his phone existed. He had not expected people to argue kindly over who made the best ribs. He had not expected Helen to move through the crowd with so much ease, greeting people, joking, checking on older guests, and still finding time to ask if he was comfortable. At one point, Michael stood beside her holding a paper plate. This is better than most dinners I've attended, he said. Helen looked at him. That's because nobody here is pretending to enjoy the food. He smiled. They just say it? They say everything. That's the danger. Michael took another bite. Worth the risk. For Helen, Michael's world opened slowly, too. He invited her to visit his company, but only after asking carefully. No pressure, he said. You don't have to come. Helen studied him. Is this where you show me glass walls and people walking around with tablets? Probably. Will anyone offer me water in a bottle that costs more than lunch? Maybe, Helen sighed. Fine. I need to see this. When she arrived, she expected coldness. Instead, she saw pressure. People moved quickly. Phones rang. Decisions came fast. Michael was calm, but Helen noticed how many people needed him at once. He was not just rich. He was responsible for many livelihoods. That changed how she saw him. Not completely, but enough. After the visit, she told him, I thought your life was all soft chairs and expensive pens. Michael smiled. There are expensive pens. I knew it. But it's not always soft. Helen nodded. I saw that. He looked at her. And you need to eat lunch like a normal human being. Michael laughed. That's your professional review? Yes. Very serious. Their conversations grew deeper without becoming heavy. Helen told him how caregiving taught her that people should not be measured by what they can still produce. Michael told her how wealth sometimes surrounded a person with noise but still left them lonely. One evening after coffee, Helen said, You know, you're not as careless as I thought. Michael looked at her. That's a compliment? From me? Absolutely. Then, thank you. He paused, then added, You're not as easy to understand as I thought. Helen tilted her head. That better be a compliment. It is. Explain fast. Michael smiled. You're strong, but not cold. Careful, but not cruel. Funny, but usually when you're trying not to feel too much. Helen looked away. He had seen more than she expected. That was almost a speech, she said. I kept it short. You're learning. The middle of the story had arrived quietly, not with a dramatic announcement, but with two people becoming less afraid of being known. And family, if this story has touched you so far, please take a second to like, share, and comment. Tell us, do you believe one act of kindness can change two lives forever? And if you haven't subscribed yet, join Love, Money, and Secret so you don't miss stories filled with love, lessons, and heart. As the weeks passed, Helen and Michael became part of each other's routines in small, meaningful ways. He learned which coffee she liked. She learned when his pain was worse, even before he admitted it. He learned that community did not need luxury to feel rich. She learned that wealth did not always mean arrogance. Still, Helen kept one wall standing, the Rolex. She rarely spoke of it. Michael did not push, but one afternoon as they walked near the bus stop after coffee, he noticed her rubbing the bare place on her wrist. Helen caught him looking. I still do that sometimes, she said. I'm sorry. She shook her head. Don't be. I made peace with it. Did you? Helen smiled, but it did not reach fully. I'm working on it. Michael wanted to say more, but he held back. He had learned that caring for Helen meant respecting her timing. So he only said, If you ever want to talk about it, I'll listen. Helen looked at him. No pressure, no rescue mission, just patience. That was when she realized her feelings had started changing. Michael was no longer just the stranger from the accident. He was no longer just the wealthy man who found her. He had become someone whose presence made hard days lighter, someone who heard what she said and noticed what she did not say. Someone she trusted more than she had planned. Michael felt it too. He admired her strength, but it was her honesty that pulled him closer. Helen did not flatter him. She did not treat him like a prize. She challenged him, laughed at him, cared for him, and reminded him to be human. One evening, outside her apartment building, Michael walked her to the entrance. The air was cool and the street was quiet. Helen held her grocery bag in one hand. Michael stood beside her, not too close, but close enough for the silence to feel gentle. Thank you for today, he said. For what? for letting me be part of your world. Helen looked at him. You make it sound like I handed you a passport. In a way, you did. She smiled softly. You're getting dramatic again. I know, at least you admit it. Michael's smile faded into something more sincere. Helen. The way he said her name made her look up. He did not rush. He did not touch her without permission. He simply stood there, steady and honest. I know this started with gratitude, he said. But it isn't only gratitude anymore. Helen's breath caught slightly. She had known the moment was coming. Still, hearing it made her heart move. Michael continued, I don't want to make your life complicated. I don't. Want to cross a line you don't want crossed. But I care about you. Helen looked away for a moment. Then she laughed softly, almost nervously. You always choose serious moments when I'm holding groceries. Michael glanced at the bag. Should I help? No, because then I'll forget what I was going to say. He waited. Helen looked back at him. I care about you too, she said quietly. But slowly, Michael nodded. Slowly is fine. I mean very slowly. I can do very slowly. She narrowed her eyes. Can you? I'll learn. Helen smiled. This time, it reached her eyes. For a moment, they stood in the doorway, both aware that something had changed. Nothing had to be rushed. Nothing had to be named too loudly. But love had begun finding its way in. Not through money, not through rescue, not through grand promises, through coffee, through laughter, through respect, through two worlds meeting without either person losing themselves. Helen finally stepped inside, but before the door closed, she looked back. Michael. Yes? If you come to the next cookout, wear normal shoes. He laughed. I'll try. No, don't try. Do it. Yes, ma'am. She shook her head, smiling as she closed the door. Michael walked back to his SUV with a lighter heart than he had known in years. And inside her apartment, Helen placed her groceries on the table, touched the bare place on her wrist, and smiled. The watch was still gone, but for the first time, the loss no longer felt like the end of something. It felt like the beginning of a life she had never expected. By the time Helen and Michael had grown comfortable enough to laugh together without measuring every word, the Rolex had become the one topic they rarely touched. Not because Michael had forgotten, he had not. And not because Helen no longer cared. She cared more than she admitted. But both of them understood that some losses needed quiet space before they could be spoken about without pain rising again. One afternoon after coffee, Michael walked Helen toward the bus stop. She was telling him about a difficult shift at work, trying to make it sound funny instead of frustrating. So I asked him if he had taken his medicine, Helen said, and he looked me straight in the eye and said, I don't answer questions without my lawyer. Michael laughed. What did you say? I told him his lawyer was probably also worried about his blood pressure. Michael shook his head. You are dangerously good at your job. I should be paid dangerously well too, but life is still reviewing that request. Michael smiled, but his attention shifted when Helen's sleeve moved and revealed the bare place on her wrist. She noticed. You keep looking there, she said. Michael did not deny it. I'm sorry, Helen sighed. You don't have to apologize every time you remember it. I know. But you do it anyway, because I still feel responsible. Helen stopped walking and looked at him. Michael, I made that choice. You didn't ask me to sell anything. I know that too. Then stop carrying it like you stole it. He looked at her, quiet for a moment. I don't feel like I stole it, he said. I feel like someone precious was lost because I lived. Helen's face softened. She wanted to answer quickly, maybe make a joke to lighten the moment, but his honesty stopped her. The watch was precious, she said. But a life is more precious. Michael nodded. That's exactly why I can't forget it. Before Helen could respond, Michael's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, and his expression changed. Helen caught it immediately. What? Michael looked at her carefully. It's about the pawn shop. Her body went still. What about it? I asked a quiet question weeks ago. Nothing forceful. Just whether the watch was still there or had been sold. Helen's eyes narrowed. Michael, I didn't interfere. I only wanted to know. That sounds like rich man language for interfering politely. He gave a faint smile. Maybe... What did you find out? Michael's face became serious again. The records connected to the watch don't match. Helen frowned. What does that mean? It means the paperwork from the night you sold it says one thing, but the later record says something else. Helen shifted her bag on her shoulder. Something else like what? The later record makes it look like the watch came in under different details. Helen stared at him. At first, she did not understand. Then the meaning landed slowly. Wait, are you saying he changed the records? I'm saying something was changed. Helen looked away, jaw tightening. The pawn shop receipt was still in her drawer. She had kept it because the man had insisted she might need it later. At the time, she had barely cared. Now that small paper felt more important than she expected. Michael watched her closely. I don't want to upset you. You already did. I'm sorry. Helen raised a hand. No, not you. She took a breath. The old hurt returned, but now it came with anger. She had accepted the loss because she believed it had been honest. Painful, yes, but honest. If the records had been changed after the owner learned Michael was wealthy, that was different. That was not just a loss. That was disrespect. Helen looked at Michael. Why would he do that? Michael answered carefully. If he learned who I was, he may have. Believed the watch could bring him more money later. Helen gave a short laugh without humor. So now my father's watch is a money game. Michael said nothing. Helen turned and began walking again, faster this time. Michael followed beside her, careful not to crowd her. Helen, no, I didn't say anything yet. I know what you're about to say. What am I about to say? You're about to tell me we should fight this. Michael paused. We should. Helen stopped again. Michael, I am tired. The words came out plain and heavy. I am tired of bills, tired of working until my knees ache, tired of smiling when people treat caregivers like we are invisible, tired of having to prove that what belongs to me belongs to me. Michael listened without interrupting. Helen continued, I gave up that watch. I cried over it. I made peace with it as best as I could. Now you're telling me somebody may have played games with the record because he saw a chance to make money. Her voice shook, but she stayed firm. I don't know if I have strength for another fight. Michael's expression softened. I hear you. Helen looked at him sharply. Do you? Yes, because people with money sometimes call everything a fight like they can just hand it to someone else. Michael nodded slowly. You're right. That answer took some of the fire out of her. He stepped closer but still left space between them. I don't want to take this from you, he said. I don't want to handle it. Behind your back. I don't want to turn your pain into my project. Helen watched him. Michael continued. But if someone changed records connected to your father's watch, that is wrong. And if you choose to fight it, I'll stand. With you. Not in front of you. With you. Helen looked down at the sidewalk. That difference mattered. Not in front of you. With you. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she breathed out and shook her head. You know, my life was much simpler before I saved you. Michael gave a quiet laugh. I believe that I had bills, but at least nobody was inviting me into legal trouble over a Rolex. I'm not inviting you into legal trouble. What do you call it? Justice. Helen looked at him. That word sounds expensive. It can be simple. Nothing involving rich people and paperwork is simple. Michael smiled. Fair. Despite herself, Helen almost smiled too. Then her face grew serious again. What would we even do? Start with your receipt, Michael said. Then compare it with the changed record. If the details don't match, we ask questions. And if he lies, then we keep asking. Helen folded her arms. You make that sound easy. It won't be easy. Good. I prefer honest answers, Michael nodded. Then here is another honest answer. You don't have to do this tonight. You don't have to decide because I brought it up. This belongs to you, Helen. The choice is yours. Helen looked toward the bus stop. Her bus was approaching in the distance. For a second, she thought about walking away from it all. Let the pawn shop owner keep his changed records. Let the Rolex stay gone. Let peace be enough. But peace built on someone else's dishonesty did not feel like peace. Her father had taught her kindness, but he had also taught her not to bow her head when someone tried to cheat her. Helen looked back at Michael. If we do this, she said, we do it my way. Michael answered immediately. Your way. No showing up like some powerful CEO scaring people. I won't. No waving money around. I won't. No treating me like I'm too emotional to think clearly. Michael's eyes stayed steady. Never. Helen nodded slowly. And if I tell you to stop, you stop. I stop. The bus pulled up near the curb. Helen stepped toward it, then turned back. I'll bring the receipt tomorrow. Michael's face changed with quiet relief. Okay? And Michael? Yes? If you say, I told you so, at any point. I'll deny knowing you. He laughed softly. Understood. Helen climbed onto the bus and took a seat near the window. As it pulled away, she looked down at her bare wrist. For the first time, the emptiness there did not only remind her of loss. It reminded her of a question. What if the watch was not gone forever? Michael stood on the sidewalk until the bus turned the corner. He knew the next step had to be careful. This was not about money. It was not about pride. It was about giving Helen back the right to stand up for what belonged to her family, and this time she would not stand alone. The next afternoon, Helen arrived with the receipt folded neatly inside a small envelope. Michael was waiting outside the same coffee place where there. Friendship had first started to feel natural. He did not bring a lawyer. He did not bring assistants. He did not bring anyone who would make Helen feel small in her own story. Helen noticed that immediately. "Good," she said. Michael frowned lightly. "Good. You came alone. I promised." Helen handed him the envelope. "And I brought the receipt." Michael took it carefully, as if the paper itself deserved respect. They sat at their usual table. Helen watched as he compared the receipt with the record he had obtained. His expression grew serious, but he did not rush to speak. Helen leaned forward. "Say it plainly." Michael looked at her. "The dates don't match. The description was adjusted. The purchase amount changed later. Your receipt proves the original transaction." Helen sat back. "So he lied. He changed enough to make ownership harder to prove." Helen's mouth tightened. "Over a watch I sold to save a man's life." Michael's voice was quiet. "Yes." Helen looked toward the window. For a moment the pain returned, but this time it did not weaken her. It steadied her. "Then we go there," she said. Michael nodded. "Together?" When they entered the pawn shop, the man behind the counter looked up. His face changed when he saw Michael, then changed again when he saw Helen beside him. Helen noticed both reactions. That was enough to tell her plenty. The man forced a smile. "Can I help you?" Helen stepped forward before Michael could speak. "Yes, I came about my father's Rolex." The man looked at Michael. "Sir, if this is about—" Helen raised her hand. "Don't talk over me. The watch was mine." The man's smile faded. Helen placed her receipt on the counter. "This is the original receipt from the night I sold it. Your later record says something different. I want to know why." He glanced at the paper but did not touch it. "Records can have errors." Helen nodded. "Good. Then correcting it should not be hard." Michael stood beside her, silent. The man looked uncomfortable. "The item has already been processed." Helen held his gaze. "Processed does not mean honest?" The shop grew quiet. The man shifted behind the counter. "I don't know what you expect." Helen's voice stayed calm. "I expect the truth." Michael finally spoke. "And I expect the record to match the original sale." The man looked between them. He knew then that Helen had not come alone, but he also knew she had not come as a helpless woman hiding behind money. She came as the rightful voice in the matter. After a tense pause, the man reached beneath the counter and pulled out a file. His hands moved slower now. "I may have made a mistake," he muttered. Helen's eyes narrowed. "A mistake is writing the wrong number once. Changing details after learning who was connected to the sale is something else." He said nothing. That silence answered more than his words could. Within the hour, the truth became clear. The Rolex had not been sold away yet. It had been held back, its record adjusted so the shop could demand far more later. Helen stared at the watch when it was finally placed on the counter. For a second, she could not move. There it was, the same weight, the same face, the same scratches her father never cared about. The same watch she thought she had lost forever. Michael looked at her. "Helen?" She blinked quickly, but tears still filled her eyes. The man behind the counter pushed the watch forward. "You can take it." Helen did not reach for it immediately. She looked at him first. "You didn't just change numbers. You touched something that carried my father's memory." The man lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." Helen breathed in slowly. "I hope you remember this before you try it with someone who doesn't have anyone standing beside them." Then she picked up the Rolex. Her fingers closed around it. Michael watched quietly, giving her the moment without trying to own it. Outside the pawn shop, Helen finally let the tears fall. Michael stood close, but he did not touch her until she looked at him. Then he gently took the watch and fastened it around her wrist. The Rolex returned to the place it had always belonged. Helen looked down at it, overwhelmed. "I never thought I'd see it again." Michael's voice was soft. "The watch brought us together. But I'd still choose you, even if it never existed." Helen looked up. For once she had no joke ready, so she simply said, "Michael." He smiled. "Too much?" She shook her head. "No, just enough." Months passed. Helen earned her promotion through her own hard work, her patience, and the way she cared for people even on difficult days. Michael continued leading his company, but he no longer measured success only by numbers. They did not save each other. They grew beside each other. At a joyful community celebration in Ohio, music filled the air, laughter moved from table to table, and Helen stood beside Michael with the Rolex shining on her wrist. She lifted her hand and smiled. "If I ever sell that Rolex again, stop me." Michael laughed. "If you do, I'm buying it back." Helen shook her head. "You better not. I'll make you drink regular coffee for a year. I already survived it once. And look how humble you became." They both laughed. As the evening continued, Helen looked around at the people gathered, from both sides of their lives. Nothing about the journey had been easy. A crash had brought fear. A sale had brought pain. Dishonesty had tested her patience. But kindness had opened a door, truth had brought justice, respect had allowed love to grow, and the greatest treasure was never the Rolex. It was finding someone who saw the heart before the hardship. So family, if this story touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who believes kindness still matters, and comment your thoughts below. And if you haven't joined us yet, subscribe to Love, Money and Secret for more stories filled with love, lessons, and heart. Because sometimes one sacrifice does not just save a life, it leads two hearts exactly where they were meant to be. True love is not measured by money, status, possessions, or influence. It is revealed through sacrifice, respect, integrity, and the willingness to see someone's value long before you see their circumstances. Helen never helped Michael because he was wealthy. Michael never loved Helen because she saved him. They built their relationship on gratitude, honesty, friendship, dignity, and mutual respect. The Rolex was returned. Justice was served. Love grew naturally, and both remained equals. The watch brought us together, but I'd still choose you even if it never existed. The greatest treasure was never the Rolex. It was finding each other.